Are our debaters ready? Are my judges ready?
Yep.
Okay, then if everyone is ready, we will begin. I'm going to turn my camera off.
Can everyone hear me? Okay,
Yes,
perfect.
I can.
Perfect. Okay, so I will begin my 5 minutes now. The Treaty of Versailles was put into place at the end of World War I, and it laid out consequences to Germany specifically. Now, there were a lot of rhetoric that came out of this saying that the parts of the Treaty of Versailles were unjust or too strict on Germany, and that it had long lasting impacts on Germany that were negative. But that's not actually the truth. And it's more of an illusion of unfairness, which is why I stand in affirmation with the resolution today that the Treaty of Versailles was a fair peace settlement. Now, for some definitions, the Treaty of Versailles, as I said, was a peace treaty at the end of World War I that laid out consequences for Germany. And with the word fair, we'll be meaning this as the word just, which is given by Oxford Dictionary. As this is a statement, I believe that this is a fact debate, which means that the weighing mechanism should be more true than not. So we're going to be taking a first look at some of the parts of the Treaty of Versailles. So we'll be first looking at the benefits of parts of the Treaty of Versailles, and then we'll be looking at more closely at that illusion of unfairness. So we'll start off first with how there were actually benefits from the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles made sure that Germany had to give back a lot of territories that were taken during World War I, which included Belgium, Czechoslovakia, Poland, as well as different territories that belonged to other countries like France or different parts of Africa, which meant that these countries were more given, especially ones like Belgium, Czechoslovakia, and Poland, were given more of their own independence. So this showed that this really benefited these specific countries. Not only this, but Germany had to give 50 billion marks in response to the war, HistoryNet tells us. And this amount actually benefited a lot of the economies that were really struggling due to the fact that they had been annexed or had to deal with this war. And although some of this may seem a bit difficult for Germany to handle, a lot of the reason why people believe that the Treaty of Versailles is unfair is really this illusion of unfairness. So we'll take a closer look at that. Some of the allies used specific wording in the treaty, and this is according to history.net as well, that created an
Isabella,
illusion that
I'm sorry to interrupt, but one of our judges cannot hear anything.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure what to do, and this is an interruption on my part. Do any of my other judges have suggestions on how to handle this?
Have they not been able to hear the entire time, or just recently?
I'm guessing the entire time. I don't know. I'm surprised that we're just now hearing it. But again, Isabel, I'm super sorry to have interrupted.
Yeah, I mean, leave and rejoin, but I think that's what he just did.
But
yeah, let's wait for them to come back and see it.
Pardon, Jared, I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I was talking over you and I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, no. I was gonna say, yeah, we can wait for him to come back. And if he heard if it cut out really suddenly, then I think we can just resume. But
Jacob, can you hear now?
Isabella, would you mind speaking a bit more just to make sure our judge can hear you? I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Jacob, can you hear me?
He says he's going to leave and come back in. Again, I'm super, super sorry for this interruption, but
Yeah, does one of you want to maybe go to the tab room and ask them what to do in this situation?
Yeah, I'll see if I can find the link to tab.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's probably what the thing we should probably do right now.
And Isabella, are you aware of where you left off? Because we will just continue from where you were if that's satisfactory, or we can maybe restart, I guess, since Jacob didn't hear it. But
Yeah, I paused my time, but if he wants, I can always start over.
Would you
Jacob,
mind
I saw
telling me
you
what time you've gotten here for?
Can you hear now?
Vincent, I was at 3 minutes, so I had 2 minutes left.
I was actually at 3 minutes exactly as well. Excellent.
No, we can't hear you.
I think you might be muted.
It could be an issue of internet connection, because when the internet connection is low, you'll see like a little box with the bars on it.
Yeah, I'm hovering over Judge Jared's box, and it's actually green. So, it's strange.
Oh no, I'm not the person who's having the issues.
Oh, Judge,
No,
who's
it's Jacob, and
Jacob?
his connection is lost.
My brain is frazzled right now. I apologize.
It's been a long day.
It has been a long day. It's like it's a JA name. It's about the same thing, right?
He says he's going to try on his phone, so let's see if that makes a difference. Pardon me, I'm so sorry.
Not at all. Isabella, I'm completely all right with you if you want to redo your speech, or if you want to continue. I'm fine with either. This actually happened in the quarter 3 tournament, and I had to redo my whole speech. So yeah, it happens sometimes.
Can you all hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
hello.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, thank
Okay.
you. But
was-
now we're waiting on the judge that stepped out to go to the tab room.
Okay, and just so you guys know, I missed everything. I was working on a paper, and I came back to this room, and I like you guys were talking, and I was like, well, I didn't hear any of it, so I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It's all good.
I believe that between the two debaters, they decided that Isabella will start again.
Okay.
Is that what we've decided? But we do need to wait again on that last judge to return.
Okay.
Oh, there they are. Jacob can now hear.
Okay, are we back on?
Yes, so we are back on, but Isabella will be starting again from the beginning.
Sounds good.
All right, I'm going to turn my volume off again too in case I have another coughing fit.
All right, is everyone ready?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, great. The Treaty of Versailles marked the end of World War I, and many believed that it was a bit too strict on Germany and that it had very deep negative impacts on the country. But really, that's honestly a large part to do with an illusion of unfairness, and is why I stand in affirmation with today's resolution that the Treaty of Versailles was a fair peace settlement. Now, for our definitions, the Treaty of Versailles is a peace treaty that marked the end of World War I, that laid out consequences for Germany. And fair, the definition is just, as given by Oxford Dictionary. Now, as this is a statement, I believe that this is a fact debate, which means that the weighing mechanism should be more true than not. So before we get into how this is an illusion of fairness, we first have to discuss how there are actually different positive aspects from the Treaty of Versailles, which is specifically parts of reparations and the giving back of territory. So after the Treaty of Versailles was put into place, Germany had to give back a lot of its territories, which included Belgium, Czechoslovakia, Poland, as well as different parts of France and parts of Africa, which gave a lot of these countries, especially ones like Belgium, Czechoslovakia, and Poland, another more independence than they had when annexed under Germany. Not only was that one of the benefits, but Germany had to pay back 50 billion marks in reparations to these countries, History Net tells us, which explains that a lot of these countries, although they suffered from Germany annexing them at one point, they were still able to recover due to the Treaty of Versailles. So that actually supported a lot of what happened to those countries. And we can see here that there are positives from the Treaty of Versailles, significant ones. And although there are positives, some people argue that there are significant negatives that make the Treaty of Versailles unfair. But that's actually partly due to an illusion of unfairness. So that's going to be my second reason that we'll now take a closer look at. Some of the allies, actually this is the New York Times, June 2019, used specific wording in the treaty as an illusion to make it seem as if the Treaty of Versailles was much harsher on Germany than it actually was. And these allies did this to appease some of the other allies, like the French, who were especially angry with Germany. It made it seem that Germany had to pay over 100 billion in reparations, but Germany ended up only paying around 50 billion marks, as I stated before, which is actually less than Germany had actually offered. They had actually offered to pay over 50 billion in reparations, but ended up paying only 50 billion. And not only this, but it explains further that this reparations did not have any significant negative impacts on Germany. And Germany actually was able to have the support from other countries when having these reparations. They weren't alone in paying these reparations. United States banks continuously helped Germany by lending them money during this time. So we can understand that the Treaty of Versailles is much more fair than a lot of people believe that it is, due to the fact that it created a positive impact for a lot of the countries that were negatively impacted by Germany during the First World War, and the fact that there is an illusion of unfairness that was created by the Allies to make sure that other members were happier with this deal. So for all of those reasons, I stand in affirmation with the resolution that the Treaty of Versailles was a fair peace settlement, and I'm now open for cross-examination.
Excellent. All right, I believe I've got... Oh, that's not the stop button, that's the lap button. There we go. 2 minutes of cross-examination, which I'm going to begin now. Firstly, how's your day been?
It's good. It's a little tiring. I don't know what
I
time
totally
it is there.
feel you. No, that's fair. Could I just get the two
9 hours.
taglines for your contentions really quickly?
Yes. So the first one is the reparations and the giving back of territories, and the second is an illusion of unfairness.
Illusion of unfairness. I understand. Who would you say this treaty was unfair to, or at least this illusion would have you believe it was unfair to?
So, as I stated before, there are some that believe that the treaty was unfair to Germany and said that it was too strict on Germany because...
In that case, who would find the treaty to not be that strict? Who stated that?
I'm a little bit confused by your question.
Essentially, you've said that there are some who believe the treaty was unfair. Is there anyone who did believe that the treaty was fair? Any historians or news sources?
Oh, yeah. So I actually got this from a New York Times article that was specifically from a historian.
A New York Times article, I understand. And what is your definition of fair?
Just.
Okay, I understand. Just.
Yeah, just.
I understand. Additionally, you stated that the reparations actually benefited multiple European economies. Is that true?
Yeah.
I understand. And then you stated the reparations did not negatively impact Germany. Is that also true?
Yes.
Okay, I understand. In that case, I'm going to cede the rest of my time and get right into my 6-minute rebuttal. All right. Just to make sure everyone, I'm coming through loud and clear for everyone.
Yeah.
Judges and
Yes.
my opponent. Excellent. Okay.
Yep.
Just quickly before I start my speech, I'm going to be explaining my points before going on to my opponent's points. And that being said, let's just get right into my 6-minute rebuttal. I'd like to congratulate my opponent for being here in the gold medal round. And of course, I'd like to thank the assembled judges for judging us here today. As we discussed the resolution, the Treaty of Versailles was a fair peace settlement. We do accept the fact that this is a fact round, and we do have some additional definitions. We'd like to actually add on to the Oxford definition provided by the opposition for the word fair. We believe that fair should also be defined as, quote, free from self-interest, deception, injustice, or favoritism, because we also got this from Oxford dictionaries, therefore it should also be accepted. And we define peace settlement as an agreement meant to reach a lasting peace, and that is under Cambridge Dictionary, as it would turn out. And so we have 2 points for you today, Judge. The first point is that the terms of the treaty were unfair to Germany, and the second point is that Germany did not get to negotiate the treaty's terms, nor did many other nations. So let's just get into our first point. The terms of the treaty were unfair to Germany. So the terms of the Treaty of Versailles were incredibly unfair to Germany in various ways. The first being monetary costs, and the second being territorial loss. So in the wake of World War I, Germany was willing to cooperate with President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. This was the outline of principles that he had to propose to return stability to Europe, which was lauded by historians according to the History Channel. However, the Allied powers at the time deviated sharply from Wilson's wishes when they sat down to negotiate the Treaty of Versailles. It's commonly agreed upon by historians that the terms of the Treaty of Versailles were meant to humiliate Germany for the war, and did this by establishing outlandish terms that would belittle the German state in the aftermath of the war, which is a direct contravention of the 14 points. So prominent economist John Maynard Keynes, the pioneer of Keynesian economics, found the treaty to be, quote, a Carthaginian peace, essentially a brutal peace that was meant to permanently cripple the losing side. Now, the treaty did this to Germany in various ways. Firstly, it ordered war reparations from Germany towards the Allies, which at first seems reasonable. However, the treaty dictated reparations to the tune of 132 billion gold marks, or $450 billion in today's money. The amount of money that they demanded was purposefully outlandish, as the cost of all Allied damages and war debts amounted to less than 1/8 of this figure. Additionally, the reparations, according to the Federal Reserve, in large part resulted in the devastation of the German economy and hyperinflation of its currency to the tune of 30,000% inflation per month, one of the largest in human history. This would have rippling economic effects throughout the world that Woodrow Wilson himself would later pinpoint as the trigger for the Great Depression in his memoir. The History Channel lists an alternative way in which Germany was specifically humiliated by the treaty, and this is Article 231. This is known as the War Guilt Clause, and is also what the affirmation brings up in the New York Times article in their second point. Colloquially known by historians as the War Guilt Clause, Article 231 forced Germany to take total responsibility for the war. And American diplomat John Foster Dulles, who was the main author of that article, later regretted the decision to include it into the treaty because he believed that it was unjust and only served to anger Germany further. Indeed, German officials quickly used the clause as proof that the treaty directly violated Wilson's 14 points, and it resulted in the eventual downfall of the Weimar Republic, an administration that would later be replaced by none other than Adolf Hitler's Third Reich. Additionally, the treaty called for the concession of German lands that had not been seized during the war. Germany was forced under the terms of the treaty to concede 13% of its land, including all of its colonies, to 7 nations. This included colonies such as Qingdao to be returned to China and to cede land to Belgium and Czechoslovakia. However, they were also made to return Alsace-Lorraine, which is a majority ethnically German region, to France after it was conquered more than 40 years prior to the war, and Upper Schleswig to Denmark, which they had conquered nearly 60 years prior. Now moving on to our second point, which is that Germany did not get to negotiate, nor did many other nations, including allied ones. One might argue that this was all fair, right? Germany surrendered unconditionally, didn't they? The answer is actually no. Germany agreed to stop fighting after they signed an armistice, which is an agreement to cease the fighting and not a surrender. The Germans did this under the generally agreed upon presumption that the resulting peace treaty would follow Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, which, as previously stated, the treaty failed to do in spectacular fashion. Neither Germany nor any of the defeated nations had any say at the Paris Peace Conference, which is where the treaty was negotiated, which lasted for more than a year. Many of the smaller nations in the Allies were not represented either. This was because many of the larger nations on the Allies agreed with Wilson's plan explicitly, but behind closed doors they saw it as a threat to their power. France wanted Germany to pay massively, and the UK saw the 14 points as challenging their power over the European continent. The result was a treaty that not quite any nation was happy with. In his 2017 analysis of the Treaty of Versailles, in fact, historian Dr. Michael Nyberg states that the treaty was actually disadvantageous towards some of the Allied nations, including Greece, who lost territory to the Ottoman Empire, and various Balkan nations, who lost territory to Austria-Hungary. National Geographic outright states, quote, "The treaty was disliked by every nation that signed it, and that it laid the foundations for the Second World War, which, need I remind you, was the most deadly war in human history in terms of human casualties. It aggravated the Germans, but also many other signatories to the treaty, and made it all too easy for many of the central powers of World War I to rejoin the Axis for World War II. Thus, we can conclude that the Treaty of Versailles was not a fair peace settlement. It did not foster peace, merely a deadlier war just decades later in a way that disadvantaged all but the biggest players under false pretenses. It triggered financial ruin around the world for the sake of a nation's pride, and it caused the death of millions of soldiers and civilians for the sake of a nation's power." Now, just to respond to a few of the points made by the affirmation. The affirmation states that Germany had to return the territories that it gained during the war. It did, but it had to return more. The affirmation also states that the Germany was forced to repay many of these war costs. However, the amount of costs demanded in the treaty were specifically outlandish, to the point where they were more than 8 times higher than what Germany had actually cost these nations. And so therefore it actually caused the Great Depression, which didn't help anyone's economy. In fact, it sunk many of the economies around the world. And additionally, the affirmation speaks of the illusion of unfairness, but we know that this is not true because it actually disadvantaged many allied nations as well. It's for these reasons that we urge you to vote for the negation side today, and I open myself up to 2 minutes of cross-examination. Thank you very much.
All right. So starting off with my first question. So you talk about the concessions of different colonies. So can you specifically talk about those again? So who exactly were they given up to? So because you talked about how they were previously conquered by Germany.
Yes, that's correct. So, for example, we have the Chinese peninsula of Qingdao, which was returned to China, but that actually was not conquered by Germany during World War I. It was actually ceded to Germany under a treaty by China decades prior. Additional examples include various Pacific territories that the Germans held, as well as African ones that were not directly related to World War I at all.
Okay. But you would say that there was no benefit in returning some of these nations and not having power over them anymore, like the African nations?
Well, I believe we're discussing under the resolution whether it was fair or not, and I think we can definitely argue that it was not fair.
Mm. Okay. What would you say necessarily means fair then?
Well, the definition that we provided was just and free from self-interest, deception, injustice, or favoritism. So Woodrow Wilson's 14 points explicitly rejected irredentism, which is a nation trying to reclaim what it sees as the true bounds of its nation, and essentially the forced return of Germany's colonies to these nations that weren't involved in World War I was seen as a violation.
I have one more question. So
yes.
why weren't Woodrow Wilson's 14 points accepted?
They were accepted actually by the United Kingdom and France explicitly. They met with Woodrow Wilson and said we want to accept this, but behind closed doors, they saw it as a threat. And so when they sat down to write the treaty, they wrote it in a way that was massively disadvantageous to Germany and violated the 14 points. And I believe that's our time.
Okay. All right, so as a brief off-time roadmap, I will be first going over Vincent's points and then really just tying my own. I only have 3 minutes, so I'll try to tie in my own as well. All right, so let's begin. So I agree with his definition that of adding to fair. So we'll discuss that as we go on. So with his first contention of the unfairness to Germany. He talks first about the monetary cost. And as I already stated, that number that was specifically given was an illusion. Germany didn't actually pay that much money. Not only did they pay much less that was actually in the wording of the treaty, it showed that the treaty itself did understand what was fair and what wasn't, because Germany did not have to pay that specific number that the negation talks about. And still, they were actually given assistance by other countries when paying this back. So really, this monetary cost is not what Vincent is saying. So also, he talks about how this actually destroyed Germany's economy, but that actually isn't true. In the New York Times article that I read, it actually stated that the problem that specifically hurt Germany's economy the most was that Germany actually decided to begin printing money. And this was actually what caused the disturbance in their economy. It wasn't the treaty. As we've already seen, the number that he said they had to pay was not actually what they ended up having to pay. So that point doesn't flow. And we can go on to look at how different territories had to be given up. And I would say that that's not necessarily unfair, because even in his own definition, it talks about free from self-interest. And in that aspect, giving back territories that, especially ones in other continents like Africa, isn't necessarily something that I think is unfair, especially after such damaging war like World War I. And then he talks about, so that was in his second contention of the war guilt. So I would say that at the end, he really talks about how this led to World War II, but I would disagree with that. I wouldn't say that the Treaty of Versailles is what caused World War II. What caused World War II was really a lot of negative narratives about different marginalized groups that really was put in by the man that was discussed at Adolf Hitler. So we can understand that the different positions that are really being brought up by Vincent just don't stand and aren't necessarily true. And last, he talks about how this brought out a disadvantage to allied countries. But as I stated before, a lot of the countries that were most deeply impacted by the war actually got a significant benefit from this treaty. So yes, I'm now...
All right, I believe it's a 5-minute rebuttal. All right, then. Let's just go into an off-time roadmap. So essentially, I'm going to be addressing some of the points made by Isabella here before going back into my own case and restating what Isabella dropped in her rebuttal. And that being said, let's just get our 5 minutes underway now. I'd like to thank Isabella once again for a brilliant rebuttal speech. That being said, let's just get right into this debate. So I'd like to say my appreciation for Isabella accepting our additional definitions for what fair means, and additionally our definition for peace settlements. Let's just get into some of the points that she makes here. So the affirmation goes on to state that the cost that was specified in the treaty was an illusion, that they didn't actually pay all of it. While that may be true, how is that just or fair? It's actually neither of these things, because as the negation has stated, the reason why this number was set so high was specifically to humiliate Germany. There was really no need to do this. It wasn't done out of fairness or the interest of justice. It was done out of the interest of favoritism and self-interest. And because this has to be free from those things in order to be fair, therefore the treaty was not fair. Additionally, the reason why Germany had to start printing money at such a high rate was because they had to pay this substantial sum back. Whilst Germany stated that they would commit to this total, the reason they only ended up paying 50 billion German marks for it was because that was all they could afford at the time. The affirmation stated that American banks were more than happy to help Germany out. We've all had an experience with a big bank or two. This is simply untrue. American banks were willing to lend money to Germany because they were predatory and they saw the German state as weak, and therefore they were able to do this because they want to take advantage of a weakened German state. Additionally, the affirmation states that it's not necessarily unfair to return territory to a previous owner. And while the negation would agree with this today, Germany didn't return North Africa to the Africans. It returned North Africa to Italy. And once again, this shows that this is indeed favoritism, because there was no need for Germany to return this territory to Italy, which it conquered decades prior to World War I. And in the run-up to World War I, or in the run-up to World War I, if they had returned it to the Africans, then Isabella might have a good point here, but this actually is not true. In fact, Germany did not return a lot of its overseas colonies to the original owners. They returned it to other major Allied powers. The affirmation states that she disagrees that World War II was caused by the treaty, but in fact was caused by negative narratives about marginalized groups. Yes, these narratives were a major rhetoric from Adolf Hitler, but this treaty specifically got him into power. In fact, the affirmation fails to mention this at all, how the National Geographic source that the negation brings up explicitly states that the treaty was laying the background for World War II, was one of the major factors in the reason why World War II began. And this failure from the affirmation to mention this means that we should flow through as a major reason as to why you should be voting for the negation side today, because the treaty was directly responsible for World War II. The affirmation goes on to state that many nations benefited as a result of the reparations given from Germany. But if you want to argue that the Great Depression benefited a nation's economy, I think that would be a pretty tricky argument to make, because the Great Depression had lasting impacts around the globe, across all Western nations, especially Allied powers such as the United States and the United Kingdom. And this was something that was not addressed by the affirmation either. I'd just like to restate that Woodrow Wilson in his memoir specifically believed the Treaty of Versailles to be one of the main reasons why the Great Depression took place in the first place. And so therefore we can see, because this was not addressed by the affirmation, that this should flow through as well as a reason why. So actually what we're seeing is that no nation really benefited from these reparations, because in fact what it did was bankrupt Germany. Yes, Germany had to print a lot of money, but this wasn't a random decision they made. They had to start printing this money because the Allied powers demanded an outlandish sum from the Germans in order to pay back the war, and a bit more on top of that. Not just a bit more, actually, 8 times more than what they originally needed. So let's just go into a few things that the affirmation drops here today. The first thing the affirmation drops is the Great Depression, and how the treaty directly caused the Great Depression. This is a major point in the negation's favor, because they failed to mention this, meaning that we can assume it to be true in the context of this round. The next is that the Treaty of Versailles caused World War II to begin. This is from the National Geographic source, and this was not explicitly rebutted by the affirmation either. So therefore, we can also assume this in the context of this round to be true. This therefore violates the fact that this is a fair peace settlement. Under the definition provided by the negation, which the affirmation accepts, of what a peace settlement is an agreement that's meant to create a lasting peace. And in the wake of the Treaty of Versailles, World War II occurred in less than 2 decades. So therefore, this was not a peace settlement at all, nor was it a fair one, because actually what we saw is that World War II was a direct consequence of the Treaty of Versailles. That being said, as this is my final speech, I'm going to explain to you, judges, a few reasons why I believe the negation should win the round today. I have 4 voting issues, or reasons that the negation should have your ballot. The first is false pretenses. The affirmation accepts the negation's definitions of fair, and that is that it is free from self-interest, deception, injustice, or favoritism. The affirmation also fails to clash with the point that Germany signed the armistice under the pretenses that the treaty would follow Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. Therefore, by violating this, the Allied powers committed deception against Germany. Therefore, this is false pretenses, and therefore it violates the word free and fair in the resolution. The second point, Judge, is economic ruin. The affirmation fails to mention how the affirmation fails to rebut with the point that this directly caused the Great Depression, which actually ruined many countries' economies. The third is World War II. As previously stated, the affirmation fails to rebut the fact that this actually was the direct catalyst for World War II, which was the most devastating conflict in human history. And the fourth voter, Judge, it was unfair to other nations, including allies. The affirmation fails to mention that the allied nations, some of these smaller allied nations, were also disenfranchised and disadvantaged by this treaty. And so therefore, it was unfair not just for Germany, but for these smaller nations as well. And these all are issues that flow through because of the affirmation's failure to respond to them. It's for these reasons that we strongly urge you to vote for the negation side today, and I'd like to thank you all very, very much.
All right. Before I begin, I just want to give a quick thank you to everyone for coming out, to my judges for being here, our judges, as well as Vincent. You're a really great speaker, so I could listen to your voice just like on repeat. It's very calming. So let's jump right into it. Okay, so starting off, I really just want to go over voting issues, as this is a short speech, so I don't have too much time. So we'll be starting off first with the set weighing mechanism, which we both agreed upon wasn't too tied into today's debate. So I really want to focus on that. So when we look at the two different points that I want to bring up, which is really about how there were nations that did benefit from this treaty, and the fact that it was not as unfair as to Germany as it may seem. So we'll understand first with how this benefited a multitude of nations. So Vincent says that this harmed everyone, but that's just not necessarily true at all. As we've seen that there was a significant benefit in the economies of different countries that really were struggling, like Poland. And we can understand that these countries that were really struggling after being annexed by Germany saw a significant increase in their economy after reparations were given to them after the Treaty of Versailles. So when he says that every single nation was negatively impacted, we can't agree with that, because it's just not true. It's more true than not that there were benefits to a multitude of different countries that were really struggling after what happened in World War I. So we can understand that when we look at the word fair, we can understand that we both agree that part of it meant just. So it was just for those nations to be able to succeed after being annexed in the First World War. So that was my first voter. And my second voter is, again, that it wasn't as unfair to Germany as many believe. So with this, again, as I've stated before, the amount of money that was stated wasn't actually paid off. And Vincent says that this was really only, that goes against the definition of self-interest, but really it showed that countries, even though it may have seemed more harsh, they still were fair and just to Germany by understanding that such a high price was not possible. And with the Treaty of Versailles, they were still able to help and make sure that they were able to pay off these reparations. And we could say that possibly the United States banks were predatory in their in helping, but I would say that the place that I found this showed that the United States in general wanted to support Germany through this time. And so for those reasons, I stand in affirmation today. Thank you.
Wow, what a round this was. I really appreciate this. Thank you so much.
You too. You're great.
Thank you to both of
really
the
great.
debaters.
Thank you.
Good luck. Have a great evening, and good luck for the rest of the weekend.
Best of luck to you, Isabella. I'm going to go enjoy
too.
my weekend now. Hopefully
Yeah.
you do too.
Hi.
Bye-bye.